Welcome, everybody. Aloha from Hawaii. My name is Amanda Ellis. I am the Director for Global Partnerships at the exciting new Julianne Wrigley Global Futures Laboratory at Arizona State University. And ASU is actually #1 in the US for impact through the Sustainable Development Goals. And for the last 6 years in a row has been #1 in innovation, with Stanford at #2 and MIT at #3. So I'm absolutely delighted to welcome today 3 fabulous speakers, one from ASU, Erin Carr-Jordan, who leads social impact at Ed+, which is the part of the university that does absolutely brilliant work in high tech and instructional design for global education. Also thrilled to have with us 2 incredible speakers from the World Bank Group, Taya Trumbuk, who is the Program Manager for Women Business in the Law, and Monica Restro, who will be joining us later. She's in another meeting, so we will be looking forward to welcoming Monica, and we'll introduce her then. So we all know that the pandemic has had a disproportionate impact on women. And in some countries, such as my own New Zealand, the impact has been 90% on women. This is obviously part of a broader impact around inequality. And we know that inequalities have been particularly exacerbated with this pandemic. This is also the 25th anniversary of the Beijing Platform for Action. It's the 20th anniversary of the UN Security Council, Resolution 1325 on women, peace and security, and it is the 10th anniversary of UN Women. So, stocktake, in no country in the world has full gender equality yet been achieved. And we're in 2020, people. The other thing that Taya is going to tell us more about is that in only 8 countries around the world has full gender equality even been legislated. Now, Women Business in the Law has really done a phenomenal job in gathering data around a range of indicators that Taya will tell us about across now a woman's life cycle. And these are laws which impact women's ability to be economically active. That, of course, has an impact not only for women, but for entire economies. Pre-pandemic, McKinsey estimated that between $12 and $28 trillion could be added to the global economy by 2025 if we were just to have a level playing field. They've recently revised that data in light of the COVID pandemic, and the latest research shows that by 2030, a gender-informed response to COVID could add 13 trillion to the global economy. So this is actually not just an issue of human rights and the importance of gender equality under the law, it's also an economic issue, and an economic issue that affects everyone, everywhere. So our session today will discuss the findings of Women Business in the Law 2020, and it will also, hopefully, if Monica can join us, discuss justice for women amidst COVID-19 and how the impacts are threatening women's ability to access justice. So it's now my great pleasure to introduce Taya Trumbuk in her role as Program Manager for Women Business in the Law in the Economic Vice Presidency of the World Bank Development Division, and an incredible champion helping governments reform laws and regulations to help create jobs and contribute to economic growth. Taya, welcome.
Thank you, Amanda. It's really a pleasure and a privilege to be here today, and thank you for all your support that you've given to Women Business in the Law, even from before it was called Women Business in the Law. Amanda was at the World Bank, the IFC, in fact, when the first inklings of this project were starting, when the board started asking for more gender data, and there was very little data to go around. And so it's really great to be here, and I look forward to telling you a little bit more about World Bank's Women Business and the Law. Let me see if I can share my presentation now and get us started. All right, so the fight for women's rights is not new. We can all think of a woman that we know. It can be a friend, a mother, a grandmother, your own experience, and we know how much circumstances have changed today from 50 years ago, even 10 years ago. Here in the United States, we just lost a great champion for women's equality. Amanda just mentioned her when we were prepping for this call, Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Ginsburg's work targeted sex discrimination as it affected both genders. The ability for a woman to secure a mortgage without a man, a widower's right to receive benefits from his late wife, the right for a woman to have a credit card independent of a man, or a military husband's ability to be his wife's dependent, and so many more. Ginsburg changed public and legal opinion by showing how sex discrimination hurt everyone, not just women. Thanks to her and other champions like her around the world, there's now a growing recognition that men and women deserve equal opportunities. The good news is that we know more today about the importance of equality of opportunity than we used to. We know that it is not only important because women are human beings, it is a human rights issue, but we also know that there are economic benefits to equality. Yet when it comes to equal economic opportunities, we're not there yet. Women are still paid less, they're less represented in higher paying jobs and in leadership. And countries cannot achieve their full potential if half of their population cannot participate fully. But governments can do something about this. They can change their laws to make sure women and men have the same access to opportunity. And that is what I'm here to talk to you about today. I will show you which regions around the world and which areas of the law need to change to achieve better outcomes for women and men and countries as a whole. I will show you that change is happening where it is most needed, but it is not happening fast enough. And I invite you to join me in raising awareness about the state of discriminatory laws around the world so that our sons and daughters face a different reality in the future. The 20th century brought striking social and industrial movements all around the world. And about 50 years ago, women's role in the economy began to drastically change. Women increasingly entered the formal labor force. And as the world changed around them, more and more women became employees and entrepreneurs. Today, women contribute 40% of global income per capita, and the businesses that they own and operate actually grow faster than those owned and operated by men. But as the workplace evolved, one thing did not always evolve with it: the law. And that is where women business in the law comes in. Over the last 10 years, Women Business in the Law has presented a unique data set that measures progress towards gender equality in the world of work. Our data and research identify potential areas where more work is needed so that women have equality of opportunity when it comes to getting jobs and starting businesses. It identifies barriers to women's economic participation and encourages the reform of discriminatory laws. After piloting an index a year ago, Women Business in the Law now presents an index covering 190 countries and giving each a unique score, up to 100, representing the status of gender equality in certain areas of the law today. And because inequality can present itself at any stage of a woman's life and career, Women Business in the Law covers them all. These are our 8 indicators that make up the index. They start with the basics of mobility, which examine constraints on women's freedom of movement and travel. We then move to the workplace, where we analyze laws affecting women's decisions to enter and remain in the labor force. Next is pay, where we evaluate laws and regulations concerning job restrictions and the gender wage gap. Then there's marriage, where we look at legal constraints related to both marriage and divorce. And then there's parenthood, where we evaluate laws affecting women's work after having children. In the entrepreneurship indicator, we analyze constraints women face when they start and run businesses. And then we have assets, which measure gender differences in property and inheritance laws. And finally, pension, which looks at laws impacting the size of a woman's pension at the end of her working life. These are some of the main areas of life in which the legal environment continues to limit women's economic decision-making and employment prospects. Worldwide, women have just 3/4 of the legal rights of men. The global average Women Business in the Law score in 2020 was 75.2. The reality is that all over the world, in every single region, there are laws that are hindering women's economic participation. Now, I wanted to introduce you to Merhawit Haile Mariam. She's 26 years old and she studied to be a journalist. But instead, today she's an electrician in Ethiopia. Merhawat changed professions when she learned that she could earn more money as an electrician. Many people think the construction sector is only for men, but women can install electricity as well as any man, she says. There's a lot of opportunity for women in construction, though few women work in the field. Recent World Bank research has shown that women who cross over into male-dominated sectors in Ethiopia earn on average double the profits and employ double the number of employees as women who sort into traditionally female sectors. But the reality is that around the world, many women do not have that choice because they're legally prohibited in working in certain sectors. And they face other roadblocks at every stage of their career. For example, if Merhawat could be a woman in one of the 36 countries where they cannot apply for a passport in the same way as men. In St. Lucia, for example, a woman must provide a marriage certificate to obtain a passport, but the same is not required for men. Research shows that freedom of movement is a strong predictor of female labor force participation, entrepreneurship, and women's financial inclusion. When women's mobility is constrained, we see higher gaps in account ownership and women's borrowing from financial institutions. She could also be a woman in one of the 50 countries where women are not protected for sexual harassment in employment, like in Armenia, for example, which has no legislation on sexual harassment at work. Sexual harassment not only impacts employees' physical and psychological health, but it also leads to higher employee turnover. Recent studies have also associated with a decrease in companies' profits and ultimately in women's labor force participation. In fact, gender equality and discrimination in the labor market are directly correlated with the absence of legislation protecting women from sexual harassment. Or she could even live in one of the 90 countries where women are forbidden from performing certain jobs. For example, I was recently reading an article about a young woman in Vietnam called Duan Thi Tam. Tam was an autopsy surgeon, but in 2013, she was prohibited from continuing at her job after a new decree made it inappropriate for women. After receiving very specific training for years, she now has to pursue another profession. In fact, that same decree specified 77 jobs for which employers were prohibited from hiring women. Not being able to work in high-paying jobs, such as those in mining, construction, or energy sectors, often leads to occupational segregation and a wider gender wage gap. And there are more restrictions in the law, like in those places where women are not granted paid maternity leave when they have children, or they cannot inherit property in the same way as their husbands, or countries where women are not protected from domestic violence and are unable to get a divorce. Combined, roadblocks like these mean that women all over the world are on unequal legal standing with men. And this gap is having a devastating effect not only on women's ability to participate in the economy, but also on global economic growth itself. Globally, countries are losing $160 trillion in wealth because of differences in lifetime earnings between men and women. And gender gaps in women's employment and entrepreneurship means that countries are losing income. And just 8 countries receive a score of 100: Belgium, Denmark, Sweden, Latvia, France, Iceland, and Canada. In 2010, there were no countries that received the highest score. So this progress has been very recent. And the reason I tell you this is because one small change in the law can have a big ripple effect. And that is what we're slowly starting to see. Over the last 2 years, 40 economies introduced 62 reforms enhancing gender equality. And the greatest number of reforms occurred precisely in the regions that were the furthest behind. Of the top 10 most improved countries, 9 were from Africa and the Middle East. These traditionally low-scoring regions made the most progress towards gender equality in the last 2 years. Government in the Middle East and North Africa are recognizing that they need to diversify their economies, and they cannot do it without half of their population being able to participate fully. In Africa, countries are updating old laws from the 1950s and the 1960s. And we are seeing new labor codes adopted in countries transitioning out of conflict. We had Saudi Arabia, for example, introducing historic reforms allowing women to obtain passports and travel abroad without their male guardian's permission. Nepal prohibited discrimination in employment. South Sudan adopted its first labor law since independence, removing job restrictions and opening up new sectors for female employment. And Bahrain adopted provisions on sexual harassment in employment. Jordan eliminated restriction on women's ability to work at night and guaranteed equal remuneration for work of equal value. And for the first time, Tunisia introduced legislation specifically addressing domestic violence. And so did Djibouti and Morocco. You can find more information on these incredible reform efforts on our website. But remember, these countries are improving from a very low base. Much work still remains to be done. I wanted to share again something that Ruth Bader Ginsburg had said recently, which is that women will have achieved true equality when men share with them the responsibility of bringing up the next generation. And in fact, our parenthood indicator is one of the ones that is the furthest behind globally and where we can see the most, where we want to see the most change. But when we look at where countries reformed, it was precisely in the two indicators that have the lowest scores, in parenthood and pay, where we saw the most change in the law over the last 2 years. When it comes to parenthood, 16 countries introduced reforms over the last 2 years. Except for Latin America and the Caribbean, every region enacted reforms in this area. The reforms that they did included the expansion of the amount of paid maternity leave, introduction of paid paternity leave, and prohibition of dismissal of pregnant employees. Countries that reformed in this area include Canada and the United States, but also Fiji, Jordan, Nepal, and South Sudan, which all introduced paternity leave for the first time. And under the pay indicator, we saw 12 countries introduce reforms. 7 economies from all regions except Europe and Central Asia introduced legislation mandating employers to grant equal remuneration to women and men for work of equal value. UAE, for example, removed all job restrictions based on gender, making it easier for women to enter the workforce. And this happened just in the last 2 years. But over the last 50, this is what we saw. This year, the Women Business and the Law team undertook the big effort of looking back 5 decades to see how the law has evolved for women all over the world. And as you can see, the pace of reform has differed significantly between regions, but there's been a substantial improvement in every single region of the world. And in fact, every economy that we measured, 190 in total, saw at least one regulatory change since 1970. But 2 regions stand out for the pace of their progress. It's the OECD high income, so the top green bar, and the sub-Saharan Africa region. Today, as I mentioned, in several high-income economies, there are no legal inequalities between men and women. However, this was not always the case. When we look at Belgium, which today scores 100, in 1970, its score was 38, the same score that Afghanistan has today. This finding implies that 50 years ago, women had less than half the rights of men in the areas covered. For example, married women in Belgium could not sign a contract, get a job, or administer property without their husband's permission. And African economies also made huge advancements. While Africa had very low scores in the 1970s, a sustained reform momentum over the last 50 years has led it to overtake the South Asia region and be almost at the same level as East Asian economies. But there is still much work to be done. In 1970, the average global score was less than 50, meaning that women had about half the legal rights of men. It took the world 50 years to implement reforms. Today, women have only 3/4 of the rights of men. At this pace, it will be another 50 years before we achieve legal gender equality at the global level. While this is a foundational first step, it will take much longer to achieve its meaningful implementation. And of course, the global economy is losing money the longer these gaps remain. As Amanda had already mentioned, if women played the same role in labor markets as men, as much as $28 trillion could be added to the global GDP annually by 2025. When women are guaranteed the same freedoms, choice of employment, and treatment at work as men, the global economy stands to gain enormous dividends. Sorry. In fact, economies that reform towards equality as measured by Women Business and the Law are associated with higher female labor force participation, a lower wage gap between men and women, and improved development outcomes, such as in health and education. When our 2020 report was published in January 2020, COVID-19 was already spreading and cities were starting to go into lockdown. But before the pandemic, working women cited increased childcare and family obligations at home as their primary reason for leaving the workforce. During COVID-19 pandemic, women's childcare and family obligations at home have only increased and become more pressing. And accordingly, keeping women in the workforce has only become more important. And that's why policy responses that serve to alleviate childcare will keep women in the workforce and slow the spread of COVID-19. We know that globally, women initiate the majority of family law cases, including in matters formalizing marriage or divorce, seeking custody of children, and requesting protection from violence. This is why access to family court is an important component of women's security, voice, and agency. Dealing with family law matters during a pandemic is certain to bring about unprecedented and unexpected issues. Custody arrangements, financial obligations such as alimony, and court closures amid stay-at-home orders could disproportionately affect women. In such cases, justice systems may consider implementing innovative methods of serving their constituents while maintaining safety as a priority. And the pandemic has also shown that to impact safety at home, staggering numbers of domestic violence cases are recorded. Now that work and family life have become so intertwined, it is more important than ever that laws governing women's role at home advocate for gender equality. And how are women accessing courts to obtain a divorce, judgment on custody, or get a protection order during lockdowns? How can services to survivors of violence be accessed in a safe way during the global pandemic like COVID-19? To find answers, we designed new survey questions to collect additional data on the measures that governments are implementing to address the challenges that women face during this time. And already, we have some interesting data coming out of this research. When it comes to alleviating childcare needs, we have identified 3 types of support. Governments are introducing paid leave for working parents, which can provide job security for parents who must care for their children in the absence of regular childcare. A second measure is to ensure that some childcare services remain open during lockdowns. In most countries, this is only for essential workers, but some countries have made it available to all workers. And third, enhancing or introducing financial subsidies specifically for childcare due to COVID-19 school or daycare restrictions are also popular. So you have here an example of a few countries that have done that. And when it comes to what countries are doing to ensure access to family courts, we've also seen a varied response. Some countries like Australia, for example, established a court list dedicated exclusively to dealing with urgent family law disputes that have arisen as a result of COVID-19. In countries like Singapore and Sri Lanka, family courts will deal only with essential and urgent cases during lockdown. And with regard to remote access, such as electronic filing of claims or hearings by video conference, responses are also different. Some civil codes were already equipped for such a situation. In Armenia, for instance, the civil code states that at the reasoned request of a participant in the trial, the court allows him or her to participate in the court session using audiovisual means of telecommunication. But in other countries, new laws have had to be implemented to allow for something like this. In many places, it may be a long time before courts will be able to open and operate as normal. These examples that we've seen so far are encouraging as they signal that women's security and agency remains a priority even in times of crisis. However, for countries without the infrastructure or resources to implement such systems, it may prove difficult for women to continue going to court. In some countries, for example, courts completely closed during the pandemic, only recently reopening for urgent matters. In others, no specific measures have been taken by the family justice system. Women Business in the Law will provide more insight into these new approaches that countries have been implementing in our next edition of the report, which will be released in February 2021. You can find more information at our website, wbl.worldbank.org, and I hope you will go there and see how your country performs and join us in raising awareness about discriminatory laws around the world. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Taya. And I am so excited to hear about the progress made by Belgium. And as you say, one small change in the law can have a big ripple effect in reforms. And I know that there have been 260 reforms since Women Business in the Law really began. And just a little backstory, when I first came to the World Bank Group, to the International Finance Corporation back in 2003 and spoke to the Vice President at the time about gender and private sector development, he looked at me really puzzled and said, I hadn't thought about that. I've thought about women in health and women in microfinance, but never thought about women in the world of work. And to really give him credit, he said, look, could you do some research for me? And if we think there's a case here, maybe we should beef this up. And 3 months later, he came back to me, he said, wow, we really need to create a global gender group. And that was the beginning of Gender Entrepreneurship Markets, as it was called, or GEM back in the day. And 5 people and $5 million, and off we went. And so it is just so exciting to see the extraordinary level to which you have taken this work. And even more exciting with the new partnership that we have in building a global coalition in this 25th year of the Beijing platform to really help you move the dial and to help get this information out into everybody's hands. Now, we have a video here, and Erin, I'm going to ask you if you would prefer to speak pre or post video, because Erin has been the brains behind and the practical mechanism behind getting these 4 videos done on SDG 5, and we have one in partnership with TAYA and the World Bank, and also with the United Nations Human Rights Council and the Director of Gender there, Veronica Berger. So Erin, you just tell me, raise a hand at which you would rather do. Shall we show the video first, or would you like to
that would be great.
show the video first? Perfect, and that will be a wonderful segue into Erin telling you more about how she has led the production of the videos and also the work relating to the campaign. So Chloe, are you able to screen share so that we can show this video? It's very short, it's just a few minutes, on how we can leverage this data from women, business, and the law. Oh, Jason, fabulous. We have it coming.
And on to 17 Global Development Goals, SDGs for short. For the first time in history, these global goals set out an agreed development agenda for the entire planet from 2015 to 2030. All UN member countries recommitted to gender equality, building on previous international commitments, including the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, the Beijing Platform for Action, and the Millennium Development Goals. But in no country in the world has full gender equality yet been achieved. And according to the World Bank, in 2019, only 8 countries even mandated gender equality under the law, meaning over 95% of countries still have laws that discriminate against women. This makes no economic sense. Gender discrimination is costly for everyone. UN Women estimates violence against women alone costs $1.5 trillion. McKinsey estimates as much as $28 trillion could be added to the global economy if there were a level playing field. At current rates of progress, it will take 257 years to reach economic equality. How can you help your country meet its obligation to SDG 5 and create win-win outcomes of more prosperity for all? First, it's imperative that everyone in positions of power, both men and women, advocate for change. Second, know the data. To find out where your country stands on legal gender equality, consult the World Bank Women, Business, and the Law datasets. Country summaries across a woman's lifetime highlight discriminatory laws. The good news is that since Women, Business, and the Law has publicized data, over 200 reforms have been achieved. You can also visit Equality Now for examples of discriminatory laws affecting women and girls over their lifetimes. Third, did you know that the human rights legislation of every UN member country is formally reviewed every 3 to 5 years? Called the Universal Periodic Review, or UPR for short, it's the opportunity to provide information on your country's record, including gender discrimination. The UPR Country Review Timetable is published in advance online. UPRs take place at the Human Rights Council in Geneva, and all members can ask questions about your laws and practices to prevent discrimination. Civil society and UN experts also provide input. This is a great opportunity to prepare for positive change and be recognized. Country reviews by the CEDAW Committee are a key mechanism too. 189 countries have already ratified this international convention. CEDAW is a legally binding treaty. Every 4 years, states party must report to the CEDAW Committee on progress. The committee then issues concluding observations for follow-up action. Parliaments have a key role to play. As a legislator, you can recommend changes to your country's laws be made in accordance with these concluding observations and in advance of the UPR peer review. Consult the CEDAW and World Bank summaries and recommendations for your country. You can take action to ensure gender equality and the empowerment of all women and girls for the benefit of everyone.
Thank you so much. And we've just heard from Monica that unfortunately she is stuck in an urgent meeting, so won't be joining us. The downside is we won't get to hear her. The upside is that we can really drill down into this a little more. And now, just to give you some background before introducing Dr. Carr Jordan, when I was serving as ambassador to the United Nations in Geneva and realized that this universal periodic review mechanism, which was traditionally worked on by justice ministries, and we had our own Minister of Justice come from New Zealand when I was serving in Geneva, I began to realize the disconnect. And when we started the precursor to women business and the law at the bank, my husband, who's a lawyer, said, only an economist would come up with this crazy idea of trying to go around the world and gather all the laws that impact women and try and change them. And it wasn't until I went to Geneva as ambassador that I began to join the dots and realized that there was a whole lot of work going on with justice ministries and CEDAW, but they weren't necessarily connected to the economic impact in countries in the same way as the World Bank was. And so we were very lucky. We had Women Business in the Law come and present to the Human Rights Council and to all of us as ambassadors in Geneva. And the group of women ambassadors and women heads of agency, which was begun by Navi Pillay, she was the second woman to head the Human Rights Council and to be Human Rights Commissioner after Mary Robinson. And Navi was actually nominated by Nelson Mandela. And she began this group of women heads of agency and women ambassadors in Geneva to help advocate for change and for legal advancement. And so we agreed that each of us would ask a question when the Universal Periodic Review came up to make sure that it was really put on the table. Now, of course, this is just one element of the UPR, but it's a very important element. And since moving to ASU to work with the Julianne Wrigley Global Futures Laboratory and having met Dr. Carr Jordan and talked to her about the extraordinary work that's done at Ed+, we have built a global coalition to really support the work that Taya is doing and her colleagues, her amazing colleagues at the bank, and to really try to join this up with not only parliamentarians, but also civil society advocates for change. So I am going to introduce Dr. Carr Jordan now, and we're going to have her explain a little bit about the work that she does, this campaign, and then we will introduce some of the insights into a foreign policy campaign that's going to be run next week. And we have a wonderful intern from the Global Futures Laboratory, Nihal Jain from Duke University, who has done some fabulous graphics, and we'll be showing those too. So Dr. Carr Jordan is the head of social impact for Ed+ at ASU and is also the head of ASU Advance, which is a gender-focused institutional transformation program for STEM faculty. She also co-leads the global digital content and scaling strategy for the Cross ASU SDG 5 team, which is an extraordinary group of women, and we have Pam Delagi with us today too, who we hope will also be able to say a few words. So Erin, over to you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Amanda. And I think Amanda is being polite here. It is only in concert with Amanda and with Taya that we have been able to advance this very big and hopefully tremendously impactful program. Just to give you a little bit of background, we, over the course of the last year, have been working to leverage the digital capacity of ASU to catalyze a movement towards SDG 5, understanding that as an R1 research institution, we have the capabilities to really contribute here. And so we have worked in collaboration, as Amanda said, to build this national coalition or international coalition of players, including the World Bank using the Women Business and the Law data, the Interparliamentary Union, Represent Women, the Council of Women World Leaders, and others. And what we did was put together a 4-part video series, one of which you just saw, addressing different areas of SDG 5 and the targets and indicators. The videos include a video on laws, a video on leadership and representation, women, peace and security, and violence against women and girls. And as both Amanda and Taya referenced, the disproportional impact of COVID on women led us to decide to make a 5th video, which will be gender, climate, and crises. And we hope to begin creating that in the very near future. The videos informed an extension of our collaboration. All of this tremendous work from Women, Business, and the Law, we recognized that if we were able to help to scale that and to make it available to heads of state and parliamentarians around the world, if we could contribute in some capacity to that we would be helping people potentially decision make around eliminating discriminatory laws. So part of what we've done, in addition to the work that we've done around the videos, is to create a technology tool in concert with one of the wonderful groups at Arizona State University. And what that tool really does is ingest all of that data from Women, Business, and the Law, and each of those indicators and each of the scores, and create a system where we can inform points of contact, primarily heads of state and members in parliament, and anyone else who's interested in being notified, and create a structure where they can look at what's happening in their own country and simultaneously understand what's happening in corresponding regions, so that they can see who is making progress and who is still lagging behind, in hopes of really encouraging behavior change. In addition, we have this wonderful system, and it's guided by the UPR. So as the country is coming up for review, the person who is the point of contact will receive a notification saying something along the lines of, you are scheduled for your universal periodic review in 12 months. Here is a copy of your current Women, Business, and the Law report. Please review it and see where opportunity exists for you to make change and continue to eliminate discriminatory laws. And I think it's equally important to highlight the positives. So we're also saying, and to identify those areas where positive change has been made. So we're working at both lines of behavior change. And then we're also linking to this wonderful landing page that ASU has created, where we're showcasing all of the work around SDG 5 and all of the partners with whom we've been collaborating in hopes of really showcasing this global coalition and moving towards change. I think in addition to, well, the tool will hopefully be ready in 2 weeks, and we're thrilled to be partnered with the World Bank and to have this brand new tool, which is novel and we think is really going to be impactful. And one of the wonderful things is that as laws change, we're able to identify it in close to real time, so that anytime someone who is a point of contact wants to understand what's happening in any given country around the world, all they have to do is log into the tool and they can see what's happening. And hopefully, as we continue to move this forward, as we continue to identify additional partners and additional points of data, we're able to create a really holistic look at what's happening around SDG 5 and to create a mechanism to move the needle, which is the overarching goal.
Thank you so much, Erin. And I know Chloe is going to try to get up on the screen the wonderful one-pages that Taya and her team have spent the last year beautifully designing and laying out. And the idea is that anyone who would like to be involved, please send us your email address to opt in, because we are, as Erin said, with this global coalition that includes, I think, all of the world's parliamentary organizations. We have the Interparliamentary Union, the oldest multilateral body in the world, which has 178 members. We have the Council of Women World Leaders, the current and past women heads of state, the Women Political Leaders Forum, which includes state and local leaders as well as parliamentarians, and the Commonwealth Women Parliamentarians. And of course, we have the World Bank and the United Nations as key partners on this. So we're really hoping that this is going to help move the dial. We have a number of civil society partners too, such as Equality Now, Represent Women. And if anyone wants to join us, please let us know. Indira, we are taking that down. Ronnie, yes, we are going to add you in. And Chloe, I'm going to pass over to you to show this now. I'll keep my audio on, but if anyone wants to double click to maximize the video, you'll see here the example of Algeria. And what Taya and her team have been able to do is, using the icons that she went through, give a score so that a parliamentarian can readily see if they're not at 100, they know there's work to be done in that area. Then, excuse me, wanting to show strengths first and then areas for improvement. It's very clear what you need to do. And right down to the level of individual laws. Excuse me, too many sessions today. So you can see that a parliamentarian can then figure out exactly what they need to do under which area to change the law. Because as Taya said, and I'm going to be quoting her a lot, one small change in the law can have a big ripple effect in terms of women's lives and in terms of prosperity for everyone. So Taya, we just want to thank you so much for this extraordinary work that's been done by the World Bank and your leadership. And we are so sorry that your colleague was unable to join us from the legal vice presidency, from the Sandy Okoro, who is such a champion for your work, and to know that the bank is very much concerned with trying to support this and help implement change. So this is, I think, such a useful tool. Now, we are going to be launching next week a campaign with foreign policy, and that campaign will be sending everybody to our wonderful webpage, which Chloe has designed. Thank you, Chloe. You will also be able to just come and visit. If you come to the ASU Global Futures Laboratory next week, you will be able to see the landing page and the 4 videos live. And then I'm hoping, Chloe, that we will be able to show now the graphics, just an insight, because we really wanted to thank you, Annette. Yes, we've captured you, and you're a T-bird, fantastic. So we wanted to thank Nihal Jain from Duke University, who is our intern this semester and has been doing some fabulous work. And you can see these graphics here, which will be showing on the campaign for foreign policy. Now, we also have with us Pam Delagi, who is really a global expert in violence against women and population issues. And Pam, I'm not sure if you're able to come on live as a presenter or if I need to read out what you're saying. I can see in the chat the importance of child labor laws and child marriage, but I'm going to ask Taya if she can refer to those laws. I know that there have been a lot of reforms achieved because of your spotlight on violence. Perhaps, Taya, if you could also tell us a little bit about child labor laws and how those are being addressed.
Yeah, no, of course. I thank you again for this partnership. I think there's nothing worse than doing all this work and then no one using the data. And so we're really happy. The more people that can access the data and use it to change these laws, the better. And so Women, Business, and the Law, over the 10, 11 years that it has been collecting information, was collecting lots of different laws. And at some point, we've narrowed it down to these 35 questions that are included in the index, but we're still collecting information on child marriage laws. We also have information on disability. This is a new area of research for us, where we're looking at laws that impact women with disabilities. And all of this is available on our website. But when it comes to laws affecting violence against women, so domestic violence laws, sexual harassment, this has been one of the areas that has had the most reforms in the last 10 years. So when we look at the 50 years, there were no laws on this protecting women from violence in 1970s or even 80s. I mean, after 90s and then in 2000s, there was a huge surge. So it has been one of the most popular areas of reform. And I think, we're getting to a place where most countries have something on the books, but then of course, implementation is a whole other issue. And so that's another area that we hope to do more in the future, is on implementation, and see, once these laws are in place, how can you actually exercise your right to that law and make it easier and more accessible for women to actually be able to go to court and enforce their rights.
Taya, and Pam Delagi makes a very good point when she references indications that the increased poverty related to COVID shutdowns increased child marriage. And Pam,
Yes,
to those points, yeah.
Yes, we've heard of this. It's heartbreaking that more and more girls are being married off because they're not able to go to school. And they're being married off for financial gain, and that's really, really heartbreaking.
Yeah, it is heartbreaking. And I think this is a really good segue, if Jason, it's possible to bring up the violence video, given that this is such a topical issue right now. If you are able to show that, we would be super grateful. I know this is not the easiest platform to navigate, as everybody has been discovering, but I think here we go. Thank you, tech guru Jason.
UN member state recommitted in 2015 to end violence against all women and girls, building on earlier international law and commitments. Yet, the sad reality is hundreds of millions worldwide still suffer gender-based violence. Disasters and crises exacerbate existing gender inequalities and violence against women and girls. Chances are, either you or someone you know is a victim. A staggering 1 in 3 women is affected. In many countries, the Me Too movement has put a spotlight on some horrifying realities, too long hidden or deliberately hushed up. Data from UN agencies reveals women are 98% of sexual harassment victims and over half of forced labor victims. 1 million adolescent girls have been raped in their lifetime. Over 200 million have been subjected to female genital mutilation. 650 million women and girls in the world today were married before age 18. More than half of the women intentionally killed are murdered by their partners or family members, totaling a horrifying 137 women every single day. Not only do these frightening statistics represent gross human rights violations, they also represent a terrible cost to society as a whole. UN Women estimates violence against women amounts to $1.5 trillion a year, some 2% of global GDP. You can make real impact as a parliamentarian and respected leader of the community by addressing these critical issues in very practical ways. First, be courageous, speak up, and condemn all forms of violence against women and girls. Second, help pass strong legislation and policies to address prevention and to provide better access to justice for victims, as well as protection and support for survivors, and to effectively prosecute and punish perpetrators. Third, promote ratification of international instruments like the 2019 ILO Convention 190 on violence and harassment in the world of work. If your country hasn't yet ratified, please make sure it does. Fourth, adequate funding for effective implementation is critical. Use your oversight function to ensure like helplines and shelters. Fifth, work to ensure all those involved in implementation are coordinated and properly trained to deal with this devastating problem. Surprisingly, given parliaments are in the vanguard of protecting citizens from violence through both legislative and enforcement mechanisms, recent studies by the Interparliamentary Union reveal sexism, harassment, and violence against women is unfortunately widespread in parliaments themselves in every region of the world. Surveys reveal 1 in 4 female MP respondents had suffered physical violence, and 4 out of 5 psychological violence, such as intimidation, threats, sexist remarks, or humiliating pictures published with sexual connotations. 58% of female respondents and 42% globally report being the target of online sexist attacks on social media. In response, the IPU has published guidelines for the elimination of sexism, harassment, and violence against women in parliaments. So what can you do as a parliamentarian? First, ensure a zero tolerance policy is in place. Second, raise awareness and provide training for everyone. Third, assess the situation in your parliament, including through confidential surveys. Fourth, ensure remedies are clear and followed, including complaint and investigation mechanisms, and disciplinary sanctions against perpetrators. Fifth, provide confidential access to assistance for victims. Parliamentarians can lead the way by example, courageously address sexism, harassment, and violence against women in parliaments and all walks of life.
Jason, thank you so much for leaving up that final screen, if it's possible. It may be too hard. So we have our wonderful Vice President and Vice Provost, Peter Schlosser, joining us in spirit, which is wonderful. And advocate for gender equality, so we're very lucky to have him. So that last screen really gave you an idea of the range of partners that we've been working with. And I'm so excited to see everybody in the chat who's signed up with their email addresses. Nahal has copied those down, so we'll make sure that we add you. And just to explain how the campaign works, so with the tool that Erin and her brilliant people, oh great, thank you Jason, her team have designed, the idea is that 9 to 12 months before the Universal Periodic Review mechanism is due to come up, you will either receive, just for your country or for your region, the list of countries that are due to come up. And you will receive this wonderful one-pager from Taya and her team that gives you a summary. And so it allows you either as a civil society advocate, as a citizen in a country concerned, to then go to your parliamentarians and say, this is not good enough. We need to have full gender equality under the law, because every country committed, not only in 1947 under the Human Rights Declaration, but recommitted again in 2000 with the Millennium Development Goals, and recommitted in 2015 with SDG 5 on gender equality and the empowerment of girls. And of course, number one is laws. So please remind them all. It'll be very important to use our voices and really see if we can move the dial. And the other use for these videos, and they will be open source, so if you want to use them and to run training programs, please feel free, but you can see they've been specifically tailored for parliament because they are the ones who pass legislation. And we're very much hoping, we know the IPU has begun to design a whole series of training around them. Just to give you some insight into how this process worked in the last couple of minutes, it was actually the president of Lithuania, as the then chair of the Council of Women World Leaders, who hosted in her presidential palace a global meeting with women political leaders as well to really kick this off. And that was back 18 months ago, I think, right, Erin? And then the next phase was a year ago, and that was in the margins of the G20. We had the Speaker of the Japanese Parliament, the Diet, who hosted a huge group from around the world, and we began then to test the videos. Originally, we thought people would watch for 10 minutes, and the parliamentarians said, give us 3 minutes, maybe 4 max, and then we want some useful links, but we're not going to watch more than that. And that's why the videos have been designed as a series of short bites, so that you can watch either just one subject matter area or all. And of course, the idea is now that we would go through all of the SDGs. I'm co-chairing with the Dean of Thunderbird the Cross ASU SDG Task Force, and we're very proud that ASU is top ranked as a university in the US on SDG impact. But we are hoping, we're number 5 globally. We're hoping to get up to number 1 globally as well. But the whole idea is really to see how we can begin to help parliamentarians with the kind of education that they need. And we want to build this global coalition of partners, so you can see just how broad that group is, and we're wanting to bring you in. We need to bring the voices of businesswomen to this important work. Yes, so we have the Commonwealth Businesswomen's Network. What a great idea, because we have Commonwealth women parliamentarians. Arif Zaman, thank you so much. That is a fantastic idea. And we do have the UNGC Target Gender Equality as a partner, and we are working with Lauren Gula, who runs that on advocacy. But what a fantastic idea. We are capturing the Commonwealth Business Women's Network. And I used to be the Australian representative to that back over 20 years ago. So I should have thought of it. Arif, thank you so much for that wonderful suggestion. We're also seeing in the chat from Pam Delagi, special attention needed for those in conflict zones and natural disasters. That is so true. And Pam, I know that you have really devoted your career to working in the most difficult areas, and we're so grateful to have you with us at ASU. A really critical point. So yes, we will think about how we can try to do that as we move the videos forward. I'm realizing that we are getting close to our final hour, and Arif, thank you. Would really appreciate if you could also advocate with Lauren. We're having a conversation with her and Nehal next week, so it would be fantastic to have your advocacy on that. And I'm not sure which country you're from, Arif. If you could let me know in the chat as well. You're from UK, fantastic. And we also have the chair of the UK Global Compact, Marcia from Relics, who is on our advisory group. And so we're going to be trying to do more across the Global Compact. Oh, wonderful. And you will see a video from Commonwealth parliamentarians, and the current president, Shandana Ghazal Khan, is going to be doing a video about this on our site. So you'll see that, yes. Fantastic. Well, thank you all so much. Thank you, Taya. Thank you, Erin, both for your extraordinary work. And Erin, just such a delight to partner with you in our cross SDG 5 group at ASU and in our cross SDG group at ASU. Very, very exciting to take this work forward. To all of you who joined us today, thank you so much for your ideas, for your input, and for so many of you for signing on. Please tell your networks as well. Look out for the campaign on foreign policy next week, and for the videos, which we will also make available to everybody, open source, as of next week. Thank you all. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And we look forward to you joining us. There are a couple of other sessions we hope you can come into tonight. The We Empower UN SDG Challenge will be going live at 11 p.m. Eastern Time. But of course, that is 8 p.m. in Pacific and only 5 p.m. in Hawaii. And we hope the rest of Asia will join us. And then we have the Middle East and North Africa finalists from the We Empower. And of course, they all have to fill out an application form where they go into women, business and the law from their country, and they have to learn about it so that they as businesswomen can also be advocates for change. So we're really trying a surround sound approach to making this incredible data from women in business and the law available. So hopefully you can join us either at 9 p.m. or at 11 p.m. for Asia Pacific and for Middle East, North Africa sessions with our women entrepreneurs. Thank you all so much and enjoy the next couple of days.
Thank you, Amanda.